Alright, let's go ahead and begin with our week 1 lecture. What are we doing here? Well, we're here to study American government. But before we can do that, we need to have at least a basic understanding of politics and how politics functions within the world at large before we can understand all the complicated processes of the American government. Just a few things before I get started though. These slides are on Angel, so if you want to print them out and make notes on the slides and follow along that way, feel free to do that. If you want to take notes on traditional pen and paper, or if you want to take notes on Microsoft Word and follow along with the lecture on another screen, feel free to do that. Whatever is most comfortable for you, however helps you learn the best, feel free to do that. Also, another thing is, please let me know about these videos. If there's a problem with the maybe the screen resolution or the blurriness or anything like that, let me know. I know how the video looks on my end when I'm producing it. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's crystal clear on your end either. So please let me know if there's anything wrong with the videos at all, and I'll try to correct that the best that I can. So let's go ahead and talk about just basic politics and what we're doing here. When you're studying politics, let's see if Word will go to the next slide for me. Okay, there we go. Whenever you're studying politics, you're studying under the realm of political science. And political science is under a larger umbrella of sciences, social sciences, called the behavioral sciences. The behavioral sciences include a lot of scientific disciplines that aim to study how social behavior works. So when you're studying political science, you're specifically studying the voting patterns or the political behaviors of people in the social setting at large. Under the behavioral sciences, there's a lot of different disciplines. If you ever take a sociology course or an anthropology course, even psychology, all of those are under the social sciences. They're all very closely related to political science. Political science is the specific science that examines societal phenomenon that address voting behaviors. Why do people act the way that they do? Why do they behave the way they do? And why do they vote the way that they do? Or why do they act in political situations the way that they do? Behavioral sciences just study the actions and reactions of humans. They try to observe the actions and reactions of humans. And they also try to do this through an experimental method. They use empirical evaluations of human behavior, actually observed human behavior within society to examine trends. And then they try to predict patterns of how we function. So when you're talking about political science, they try to examine how people function within the political realm. What are the trends? What are the hot new trends in politics? How do we project that these people will vote? Or or if you're speaking internationally, how do maybe authoritarian governments function compared to democracies? So anything that is political or government related that observes the human behavior is considered political science. So the main question for the test will be political science follows under what discipline of science, and the response would be the behavioral sciences. One thing you'll notice about my lectures is throughout I try to kind of give you a hint at what the test question will be, and then I'll try to give you the answer. So the one for this one would be that political science belongs to the behavioral sciences. This is another good reason why it's good to listen to these video lectures, is because I'll definitely try to drop hints at the test questions and answers. So moving on from political science, moving more into political science, there's two main branches of political science in general when we're studying government. There's the empirical political science, and then there's the normative political science. And these things both study political science, but they approach political science and the study of political animals very differently. So this first one on the left-hand column there is empirical political science. How the world is what empirical political scientists try to observe. They try to observe how the world is, and they use facts to support their position. They look at policy problems, and policy problems tend to focus on empirical political science. When you're trying to deal with a policy problem, you need the facts of what's really going on. Empirical political science, they measure the problems and figure out how to reduce it and enhance the quality of life. It tends to be more quantitative, and what I mean by that is that they tend to look at numbers and facts and statistics and things like that and data. It also tends to be what most political scientists study. So myself as a political scientist, one who's going to be going on to their PhD in political science, we like to look at the data behind the problem, and it tends to be what most political scientists do. However, there are still political scientists who exercise normative political science. Normative political science doesn't necessarily look at policy problems, but it tries to look at the policy problem and how we would like the world to be, how the world ought to be. It deals with ideological problems. Ideological problems tend to center on normative political science. Normative political scientists is more about values and beliefs. So instead of saying, well, we have this. Let's just use the example of illegal immigration. We have this many immigrants flowing into the country every day. Well, the normative that would be the empirical political scientist, is looking at the exact numbers of the immigration problem. The normative political scientist would look at how do we treat these immigrants justly and what is fair, and how do we tackle the problem in a manner that takes all the values and beliefs into consideration. It tends to be more qualitative. They don't really deal with numbers. They tend to deal with ideas of just and fairness and virtue and things like that. So it tends to be a lot more qualitative. It tends to also be more theoretical. How do we do this in a way that is just and fair? Theoretical, philosophical, and that also includes a lot of ideological views into politics. So when you're discussing political ideology, you tend to be discussing normative political science instead of empirical political science, because ideology is a thing that's very hard to observe, but it's very easy to discuss and be philosophical and theoretical about. So let's go ahead and look at empirical political science just a little bit more. Like I said, it frequently relies on quantitative measurement, relies on the facts and the data behind the problem. Requires thinking about how to measure behavior and activity. How do we measure the immigration flow? How do we measure economics and things like that? Just the example that I have here is the CIA fact book. Empirical political scientists rely on the CIA fact book quite a bit. The CIA fact book provides data about particular issues and particular things that are going on within the world. Every empirical political science question has a unit of analysis, whether that be individuals, institutions, groups, states, countries, processes, etc. We try to narrow it down to one unit of analysis that we can actually observe and collect data on. It follows the scientific method. If you remember back to your 8th grade middle school teachings, what the scientific method is, you formulate a hypothesis, you observe, you run experiments and things like that. Develops theory about why people act in the way that they do, and it develops conclusions based on statistical calculations or empirical observations. So once you get all this data, you can then say, well, this is happening because we see this particular number of so-and-so happening, and things like that. So empirical political scientists look at the world and try to measure it in some sort of manner and then run an experiment on it. So it's very scientific, even though it's dealing with political questions or political scenarios. Let's go ahead and talk about normative political scientists, though, on the flip side of that. So normative political scientists, they rely on thinking about how to solve issues related to political behavior and activity, and it asks what we should do about the issues or dilemmas given the behaviors being observed or concerns about how society might behave. Most interesting theoretical and important policy issues are in this category. We like to think to the future and think about how we can do this in a fair manner or in a just manner in the future, and how do we tackle this problem. So if you want to put it this way, empirical political scientists kind of look at what the problem is and what are the facts behind the problem, and the normative political scientists look at what we should do about the problem and try to answer it, being political beings. So one example that I have here for normative political scientists would be, how will President Obama's executive actions on immigration affect the dreamers, the young immigrants that migrated to this country? How will his executive actions on immigration affect the dreamers living near the Texas-Mexico border? So that would just be a normative political question. How will this affect this, and how do we execute this executive action in a fair manner that actually gets things done? So the question for your test will be, which branch of political science looks at statistics and observations, and that answer would be empirical political science. And then the other question will be which branch of political science tends to look or tends to be more theoretical and philosophical about problems or political issues, and that answer would be normative political science. So, all right. So when enough about political science and the study of government, we need to actually address what is government, or what is politics. And so we'll go ahead and do that right now. The definition of government, and the one that I really care that you know for your test, is the definition of government I have here is the institutions and procedures through which a territory and its people are ruled. Every government has institutions, whether that be the president, Congress, maybe a dictator, or a tyrant even. That's still considered just an institution. What is the embodiment of government? Every government goes through procedures, whether that be congressional hearings, court rulings, things like that. They all have institutions and they all have procedures. And all these institutions and procedures rule either a territory, rule both a territory and its people. So territory and people, it all falls under the umbrella of the institutions and procedures, which is the government. So that definition of government, I can guarantee, will be on your test. Definition of government, the institutions and procedures through which a territory and its people are ruled. So that's government. Now we need to tackle what is politics. And politics is kind of a tricky thing to tackle. But the most simple definition, and the one that I think makes the most sense, is Harold Laswell's definition of politics, which is who gets what, when, and how. Politics is all about who gets what, when, and how do they get it. The who, whether that be the people of the state of Texas, or whether that just be the people of Galveston. What are they getting, or what is the government giving them? When will they get this, and how will they get this? Will they get a monetary grant, or a money grant, or will they get a new law that stipulates they can or can't do that? So politics is all about who gets what, when, and how, and I can guarantee that will definitely be on your test. So who equals all the participants, politicians, voters, interest groups, bureaucrats, judges, children, elderly, students, lawyers, doctors, businesses. Pretty much anyone. Anyone is pretty much a participant in politics, whether they want to be there or not. What do they get? Public policies and benefits, tax returns, money, new policies that help them in some sort of way. When and how? Process of distributions of the goods. So how do they get it? Do they get it through campaigns, elections, new government contracts and subsidies, fundraising, lobbying, decision-making, new legislation, rendering decisions? How do they get all this stuff? And when are they going to get it? And so really politics is an all-encompassing process, as we'll see on this next slide. Politics occurs in all social organizations. Us right now as a class, even though I can't see you face to face, we do have sort of politics going on right now. It's the fact that I am the teacher, so therefore I kind of rule the class. I'm kind of a dictator, sort of, and you as the students are getting this information, getting this new learning from me. You're getting it through this online class. So politics is occurring even now, even though I may not be talking to you face to face. It is occurring in the fact that I'm giving you information and learning through the means of this online class, and you as the student or the consumer is receiving that information. So politics occurs in all social organizations, from student council to probably your own family lives, to even maybe you can think of work or anything like that. Politics occurs in all social organizations, all social settings. So, government is unique in the fact that government has a range of tools to manage socio-political behavior, or to manage society in the way they behave. Government can offer incentives, carrots, or they can offer punishments, sticks, to encourage or discourage behavior. So an incentive would be, let's think maybe years ahead, or maybe some of you are married, going ahead and getting married. An incentive to get married, or an incentive to get married and kind of follow societal rules, is that you get a tax return. So that's a nice little carrot. It's a little reward for following society's rules and getting that tax return in return. A punishment, that's very easy to think of. The government, if you misbehave, let's say you're caught with drugs or anything like that, anything that's really bad, they offer you the stick, or they use the stick to punish you, which would probably be arrest or maybe revocation of your license or anything like that. Government uses these tools, rewards such as tax breaks or punishments such as arrest, to encourage or discourage behavior. And government is very unique in the fact that it claims to use force legitimately against enemies or even its own people. The government is very unique in the fact that everything that it does is seen as legitimate, whether that be against its own enemies or against even its own people. So let's use some really shocking and really bad examples, I guess I'll say. Bad in the sense that they're very violent. But let's use an example of ethnic cleansing. Ethnic cleansing is just the systematic removal of persons from a region. So you can think that the government doesn't like this particular ethnic group or anything like that. They will use their legitimate force, say that we need to do this legitimately, and move an entire race of people from one location to another, race or ethnicity of people to from one location to another. Also, some governments are known to execute genocide. Genocide is very terrible. Genocide is just the systematic attacks on a population with the intent to destroy. So the government belongs to one ethnic group and it intends to destroy another ethnic group through killings or mass genocide. And it's very unique because those are really bad things. The world would see that as a negative, obviously, a negative stain on that government. But the government says, well, we have the force to do that. We're using this power legitimately because it needs to be done. And so while these things are really bad, the government is unique because they can use these punishments legitimately. The example here is Darfur, Sudan. If you guys have not been following the situation in Darfur, it was a bad genocide for a number of years in which the Sudanese government claimed legitimately that we need to wipe Sudan of this other ethnic group. Root cause of civil conflict, subject to analyses that examine political, historical, economic, and social factors. Leads to questions about the legitimacy of government. So these bad things that happen, if you do too many of them, they will lead to questions about your legitimacy. So typically governments shy away from ethnic cleansing and genocide, but it is still important to know, or important to note, that these governments that do these things claim to use their force legitimately. So, but for the most part, governments are not bad, and a lot of governments do offer enough carrots to make the sticks not seem too bad. So let's go ahead and talk about different types of governments. Obviously, we're going to be studying American politics, so we'll be studying a democracy or a republic, Republican democracy, I guess I should say. But it's very important to note the different types of government that there are out there. And I can guarantee that there will be a few questions on your test about these different types of government, so be sure to take be sure to take notes at this time. So let's go ahead and talk about the first one here, autocracy. Autocracy is a very simple form of government in which there is just a single ruler, the form of government in which a single individual rules. Power is invested in a singular person who has absolute power over institutions involving politics and government, such as a monarch or a dictator. The most famous one, the most famous autocrat that I could think of probably right now is Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea. I have a number of links here if you want to follow them. A lot of them are actually really funny. There's a Kim Jong-un song. There's Dennis Rodman and Kim Jong-un. They're apparently best friends. But Kim Jong-un, even though he's seen as this crazy dictator, still has legitimate power. People have not removed him from office, so his power is still legitimate, and he can carry out the policies that he sees fit within his own country. Even though some of those are crazy, like I have here noted here, Kim Jong-un executed one of his ex-girlfriends, which is probably not the greatest thing to do, but he executed her for just these charges that he made up. Kim Jong-un has also become really famous recently because of The Interview, movie that didn't get released, but you can reach it on YouTube if you're really curious about Kim Jong-un. But he is probably the best example of an autocrat, a single individual who rules an entire country. So let's go ahead and talk about anarchy and tyranny. And anarchy and tyranny are generally seen as bad types of government. And I can guarantee there will be a question about the difference between anarchy and tyranny on your test. And anarchy and tyranny are closely related, but they are kind of different. Anarchy is an example of having no ruler. Anarchy literally means having no ruler. An being the Latin Greek root of without, and archos meaning ruler. So having no ruler. And under anarchy, you have a complete absence of government. There's absolutely no government at all. There's no rule at all. It's a state of lawlessness or political disorder due to the absence of governmental authority. It's a kind of a utopian society of persons who enjoy freedom from government. So anarchy would be an example of extreme libertarianism. Definitely not the type of libertarianism we have in the United States at all. But whenever there is no government or there is no official rule or people to enforce the laws, anarchy usually results. I have the example down here. If you want to watch the video from the United Kingdom in 2011, you think of the United Kingdom kind of as the state that has where their citizens always abide by the law and that there's no protest and everything's peaceful and Parliament gets stuff done and things like that. But even in the United Kingdom, where we like to think of this ideal citizenry, even in the United Kingdom, there are still examples of anarchy. And in this particular example, the Parliament raised tuition in the United Kingdom, and so the students rioted. And riots are often a form of anarchy, and the fact that there's no one enforcing the laws, the riots just continue, they smash store windows, they loot, things like that. So that's the United Kingdom in 2011. If I were to update these slides, I would definitely include the most recent Ferguson riots and those types of examples where people were looting and there was no form of rule or government or anyone to enforce the laws. Give me just 1 second here. All right. Sorry, I had to go look at the other computer screen to my right here. So that would be anarchy, having no ruler. And then there's tyranny. And tyranny means that there is a ruler, there's a single ruler with absolute power, but that ruler just doesn't care about his people. So the people are kind of free to do whatever they want. And often outside of the tyrant's circle or anything like that, the lawlessness prevails then. So a lawless autocracy prevails, where you have an autocrat, you have a ruler who's a tyrant, but just doesn't really care about his subjects that much. And so the subjects are kind of free to do whatever they want, and it becomes lawless, kind of like anarchy. So the main difference between anarchy and tyranny is the fact that there is a ruler in place, but the citizenry is still acting pretty lawless, and there's nothing to really enforce that. The tyrant will often exercise power over his subjects, which is not authorized by law, and it's frequently unjust in its treatment of people. Because the tyrant doesn't care too much about his people, he'll often treat them unjustly. And the best example that I have here is Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein was considered a tyrant who didn't really care for his people, treated his people very poorly, and in most of Iraq there was no law to really guide the people that much. So that's the difference between anarchy and tyranny. If you have any questions, feel free to post them on the discussion board, the help discussion board. Well, I'll try to address them as best as I can. But let's go ahead and move on to the next type of government. The next type of government is the authoritarian government, and this is probably one that we're familiar with. And it's where the government recognizes, the authoritarian government, the government recognizes no formal limits on power, but may be restrained by the power of other social institutions, religious institutions, labor unions, trade groups, business interests. So the government has no formal limits on its power, but it will listen to other inputs or other social institutions, such as religious institutions, labor unions, trade groups, business interests. The example I have here is Burma. If you want to click on the link, you can read a little bit more about Burma. The other one that I like to use for authoritarian government is the Iranian government. The Iranian government has this basically president who is basically an authoritarian kind of figure, but he is restrained in what he can do by the religious institutions, the Islamic religious institutions within Iran. He is restrained by what he can do. So
Well, he has pretty much absolute power with no formal limits. If the Islamic Church Islamic religious institutions were to say that he can or can't do this, he would have to listen to that. So, and then there's a totalitarian government, where the government recognizes no formal limits on its power and seeks to absorb or eliminate other institutions that challenge it. So totalitarian, much like authoritarian, has this authoritarian dictator-type figure, but the government recognizes no formal limits on its power. So even religious institutions cannot restrain the dictator or the authoritarian figure. The example I have here is Syria. Syria is a very, let's say, diverse country. It has a long-standing civil war between the established government of Bashar al-Assad and then these other institutions that are trying to challenge the rule of Bashar al-Assad, and Bashar al-Assad is fighting back, and they've engaged in a long civil war. One thing that makes Syria very unique is the fact that they have a lot of religious groups, religious institutions trying to challenge the government. And so it's just kind of chaos there with all these religious groups fighting one another for control of the government. So those are basically types of rules with types of governments with only one ruler. But there are government types in which just a few are allowed in. You have kind of a tight-knit circle within these types of governments. And we're kind of familiar with some of these. And the first one here is the aristocracy. If you read a lot about, olden days in the 15th, 16th, maybe even 17th century, you see a lot of aristocracy. I guess even up into the 18th century as well. Aristocracy is just kind of where leaders are chosen by birth, but whose actions are made on behalf of the common good. So it used to be that if you were born into the royal family, the noble family, then you were to be a leader later on. And so these leaders were just simply chosen by the fact that they were, the sons and daughters, or they were chosen by birth of the king or the queen or the noble family in general. But generally the aristocrats and those belonging to the aristocracy tried to work for the common good for the most part. But definitely those that were in the inner circle of the noble family were the ones that were favored. So that's the example of the aristocracy. The other one is the oligarchy. Oligarchy is just where you have maybe a small group. You have just a small group that are within the inner circle of government. These could be landowners, military officers, even those that are very wealthy merchants or business owners. Those small groups, they control most of the governing decisions, and actions are based on the good of the group. And what I mean by that is that the actions of these small groups only benefit the small groups. The population at large is kind of left out of the benefits of belonging to the oligarchy. So for those with few, you have either the aristocracy or the oligarchy, and those are types of governments with just a few rulers, aristocracy and oligarchy. Now let's move on to the one that we're most familiar with, especially here in America, I suppose I should say. You have the government types of the many. You have citizens that play a significant part in government, and they definitely participate in elections of key public officials. So the two key terms for a government type that includes many are polity. Actions are made on behalf of all and for the common good. And then you have democracy, where democracy determines majority rule. Also going to be seen as mob rule. And we're going to get into mob rule just a little bit later. But know that democracy generally abides by the principle of majority rule. So you have, going back here. So under government type many, you mainly just have polity and democracy. All right. So let's go ahead and talk, that's enough about government types. We went from having one ruler with the authoritarian type governments, the tyranny type governments, and the totalitarian type governments. And then we went on to the few with the oligarchy and the aristocracy, and then we went on to the many with polities and democracy. So let's go ahead and move on and talk about political culture and political values. So we need to really think critically about American political culture. We're going to go ahead and study republicanism and democracy. The United States actually has a Republican form
of democracy. And so we're going to get specifically into American political culture right now. And I do care that you know for your test the definition of political culture. And that very basic definition of political culture is just broadly shared values, beliefs, and attitudes about how the government should function. So within political culture, you have broadly shared values, beliefs, and attitudes about how the government should function. And this is for both liberals and conservatives. Political culture is kind of the type of thing that both liberals and conservatives can agree on. They have these broadly shared values. So, for example, you would be very hard-pressed to find someone that doesn't value freedom. Or you'd be very hard-pressed to find someone that doesn't value equality in some sort of way. So you have these broad ideas of freedom, equality, liberty, democracy, voting, things like that. It's very broad things that every American shares with one another. And so political culture is not always clear about what majority consensus means, even though we agree on certain things about equality. How it plays out doesn't necessarily always have a majority consensus. So, for example, we've always valued equality in America, and however, for a long time, America had a history of slavery and segregation. Slavery and segregation was allowed, even though the Constitution said all men are created equal. So we've broadly valued equality for quite a long time, ever since the founding of the United States. However, how that's played out in history, how that's played out in history was not always quite clear, and it wasn't quite clear what the majority really felt about equality, since you had half the nation not allowing slavery and therefore not allowing equality. And then you have the other half of the nation saying we need all men to actually be created equal. So the majority consensus is not always quite clear, even though we do value these types of things. And there's often gaps and contradictions in what we believe. Conservatives that tend to be on the far right, and then radical feminists, which tend to be on the far left, even though they disagree completely ideologically, they actually agree, that pornography should be outlawed. These would be extremes on both the left and right coming together to agree on this one thing. So there's these gaps and contradictions. Even liberals and conservatives, even the more moderate liberals and conservatives, tend to have a contradiction within their beliefs. You'll have to forgive me. I use pro-death only to be illustrative here, not to actually say that liberals are supporting death, but I use pro-death to be illustrative here, even though pro-choice may be the more politically correct term. But let's just say, for argument's sake, liberals are pro-death on abortion, but pro-life on death penalty. So they're pro-death on abortion, but pro-life on death penalty, even though one would like to support life in all forms, or even though liberals may support life in all forms, those views kind of do contradict each other. Conservatives are pro-death on the death penalty, but pro-life on abortion. So they'll often support the death penalty, which is killing of a man, or killing of a man or woman, but pro-life on abortion, even though that fetus would still be in the womb. Again, I use these terms just to be illustrative. I don't really care either way, whichever one you may be. I only use these terms to be illustrative about death and life, and to kind of show that there is a gap and a contradiction in what we believe. So, from our political culture, we get these different types of things. We have political efficacy and political knowledge, and I really, really, really do care that you know the term political efficacy and to know the term of political knowledge. So political efficacy is very important, because without political efficacy, there's no really point in having a political system. There's no really point in participating in politics. And unfortunately, this may be kind of what you're seeing in America today, is a lowering of political efficacy. Political efficacy, in just general terms, is the public's belief that they can influence government. The belief that their vote matters, the fact that they can actually get a hold of their public officials and they can influence in government or in policy in some sort of way. And and the reason why this may be declining is because it's increasingly harder to make your vote count with the electoral college system, with so many people voting these days.
more and more your vote is counting less, and so therefore there's this feeling of political efficacy kind of on the decline. Also, it's extremely hard to get a hold of public officials nowadays. You often have to be a lobbyist, or you have to be connected in some way to actually get the ear of your local representatives, or your congressman, or even, say the governor or the president. So political efficacy is kind of at a real low right now in America, and so the public doesn't really have this belief that they can influence government. But that being said, if you know enough about government and you know how to kind of work the system, then your political efficacy might be rather high comparatively. So, public's belief that they can influence government will be the main definition of political efficacy on your test. And before you can influence government, you need to know something about it. And this is where political knowledge comes in. So, political knowledge, if you have enough political knowledge, your political efficacy may be higher. Political knowledge is just the accumulation of information and experience about the political processes. So the more you're involved with politics, the more information you have about a policy issue or about the system in general, then your political efficacy may be a little bit better. It's essential for full participation in citizenship, to be a good citizens of the United States, to do the voting, to contact your representatives, to participate in the democracy. You need to have a basis of political knowledge. So all of these things kind of build on each other. To have political knowledge, it influences your political efficacy, and if you have enough political efficacy, then you can really participate. Going back to a slide here, you can really participate in the political culture. So all these things kind of build with one another, and they kind of interact with one another. And let's go ahead and talk about our political values. So political values are very, very important for having political knowledge, for having political efficacy, and for having political culture. Forgive me for going back and forth with the slides here, but I just kind of want to show you how they all build on one another. Alright, so political values specifically. Political values are what influences our political culture, influences our political knowledge, and our political efficacy. And here in America, we're very unique, because here in America, our political values tend to fall on just these two lines: liberty and equality. We value liberty and equality, even though we may value them in different ways. So liberty, let's deal with liberty first. Liberty is just freedom from government control. We want the government out of our lives. And both liberals and conservatives, even libertarians, not so much the populists, but even liberals and conservatives both want freedom from government control in some sort of way. Very different ways, but they still value liberty in many ways. So we have liberty, which is freedom from government control, something that all Americans value in one way or another. On the opposite of liberty, we also like equality. And liberty and equality are very different things, because liberty ensures freedom from government control, but equality, we push for equality in the fact that we want the government to ensure that all men are created equal, or we want equality in certain ways. So equality means there's no difference in the treatment among different groups of people. There's three different types of equality that we deal with here in America. Equality of opportunity is the very first one, and I can guarantee there'll be a test about the different types of equality there'll be a question about the different types of equality on your test. So equality of opportunity. Equality of opportunity is one that we really do like here in America, and it's just the fact that you get the same chance and your success depends on your efforts. So it assumes no interference from others. The harder you work, the better you'll be off, and you all started at the same starting point. So the example of this would be that in this class, everyone gets a chance to make an A in this class, which is true. All of you have started with 0% or 100%, however you want to view it, with the same grade. And then what you do in this course, what you do throughout the course of this semester, will influence whether you actually do get an A or not. So here in America, we like equality of opportunity. We like everyone with the same chance to do the best that they can with their life and improve society in some sort of way. It's what you do along your life or throughout your life that influences what you actually do get. You all started equal at the same starting point, but what you did throughout the course influences where you ended up. Equality of opportunity and equality of opportunity addresses having the same equal chance at the very beginning. The next one, equality of outcomes, says that everyone ends up in the same place.
So regardless of the efforts that you put in, you are treated the same as others. So effort doesn't matter. So this would be everyone is given an A in this class. So let's say person A did all the work, all the assignments, everything they could do. They get an A. The same person, person B, didn't put any effort, didn't do the discussion boards, didn't even read the syllabus maybe, still gets an A at the end of this class. Seems unfair, right? This is why Americans really don't like equality of outcomes that much. Americans tend to like equality of opportunity rather than equality of outcomes. Because equality of outcomes ensures that equality of opportunity just ensures that everyone just slacks off and still gets an A. And we don't really support that as much. So equality of opportunity, equality of outcomes, I hope I was illustrative enough. If there's questions about that, please let me know. It's just one is equal at the beginning and one is equal at the end is kind of the way to think about it. And then there's political equality. And political equality is something that generations of people have definitely fought for. And in many ways, you can see through some of these social movements today, we're still fighting for. Political equality is just the right to participate in politics equally, one person, one vote. And here in America, we kind of do that. Obviously, there's a lot of money in politics nowadays. I am quite the cynic about campaigns and so forth. But for the most part, one person, one vote. Everyone who votes can have a say in government or can have their voice heard through their vote. So here in America, we definitely do value political equality. So keep these in mind: liberty and equality. That's the main things that Americans value: liberty, freedom from government, and equality, equal treatment from government. And we'll see this play out into how these influence ideologies here in America. But before we do that, we need to look at the world at large. Political ideology in America is very unique. Political ideology here in America tends to break down into only four little sectors: liberal, conservative, libertarian, and populist. But ideology within the world is large. So normally I would have a classroom exercise at this time, but I'll just go ahead and do the slides at this point. Political ideology within the world breaks down into this. You have this large line. Imagine this line stretching from one end of your room to the other end of your room. It's large. It's huge. You could even stretch the whole length of Galveston Island if it wanted to. Because there's so many political ideologies in the world at large. When you think of the vast world, all the countries, all of them have a different political ideology scheme. And so within the world, there's so many political ideologies. Within the world, you generally think of political ideology along this line as left and right. And on the far left, you have communism, absolute communism. I'm not speaking of the type of communism that is present in the world today. I mean absolute communism going back into Karl Marx. And then on the right, you have fascism. Fascism is a very extreme ideology that values the private sector, that really ramps up the military and things like that. So when you think of like Hitler, this would be the type of fascism. And then when you think of communism, you generally think of Joseph Stalin and Soviet Russia. So Hitler, Stalin, both pretty bad guys. Hitler killed 20 million people. Hitler killed 6 million Jews during the Holocaust. So far extreme ideologies are very, very not good. I'll just say that. They tend to be very violent and tend to harm the population at large. So this is in the entire world. We have the far left from communism to the far right with fascism. And then here in the nice little center, we have liberalism. Liberalism is a value that is an ideology that values democracy, that values majority rule, that values the population at large. And note when I say liberalism, I do want to excuse myself right here. Liberalism with a little L doesn't mean liberal as in like the liberals that associate with the Democratic Party or the Green Party. Liberalism with a small L just means one that values democracy and one that values individuals and things like that. Liberalism with a small L is an ideology that encompasses even a lot of American ideologies, but liberalism with a big L is one that tends to side with the Democratic Party here in America. So just please note that the difference between liberalism with a little L, liberalism with a capital L. And so this is liberalism with a little l, one that values democracy and one that values the individual. And liberalism is very, very tiny. It's right here in the center. And it's placed perfectly in the middle between communism and fascism. And you can think about maybe a time you saw on a Facebook political rant or things like that. People called him a communist and a fascist and things like that. The truth is that communism and fascism are completely on opposite ends, and that but they are very, very radical. So, sorry, going back here, these are just the general three ideologies in the world. Between liberalism and fascism, and between communism and liberalism, there are a ton of ideologies out there. So please don't let this confuse you. Okay, so this is the traditional thinking along this nice little line. You can think about this on any line you want to. You have the left and the right. But like I said, over here on the left, you have communism with Joseph Stalin, who killed 20 million of his own people, was a very violent dictator, leader of the Communist Party. And then over here on the right, you have Hitler that killed 6 million during the Holocaust. Both bad guys, right? So really, what is the difference between communism and fascism? And a lot of people have asked this question. What is the difference between communism and fascism? They're both very extreme ideologies. Well, this is why some people choose to represent ideology differently with a political what's called the political circle. And the political circle looks something like this. You take this little line, and then you kind of shape it into a circle by kind of pulling down on liberalism. And right here, you have fascism and communism. These are all the ideologies that were on this line right here. These are all the ideologies around this little circle here. And you can see here that when it's represented this way, communism and fascism are actually really, really close together because they both tend to have violent dictators, and they both tend to kill their own populations, unfortunately. And then, but still down here, far away from communism and fascism, is liberalism. The idea of democracy is in the idea of that people matter and everyone has individual worth and things like that. And the reason why I leave this little slice here is because there is still a chance of anarchy, in which there is no ruler, in which no ideology prevails. And when no ideology prevails, you have this nice little gap right here in total world ideology. So whichever way you want to think of political ideology, you go ahead and view it that way. I do care that you know the worldview of political ideology, because the world is so vast. There are so many political ideologies out there that we couldn't even begin to fathom them all here in America. And here in America, we have enough problem getting past liberal and conservative differences that to think of how many ideologies there are out in the world is very difficult. But please, just try to envision it, and I definitely will be on your test. The question will be something like, which one represents the far left, which one represents the far right. So, all right. So let's go ahead and talk about American political ideology. So, like I said, American political ideology fits within this nice little circle here. Here on the left, you have Democrats. Here on the right, you tend to have the Republicans and the more conservatives. So, why is it that even though they're so close together, right here in the center, why is it that we have such problems communicating with one another here in America? Why is it that even though within the world we're actually very, very close together, why is it that we can't close this gap and get along with one another? Well, the fact is that it goes back to our political values, and it breaks down into this nice little what's called the American square, or what I've termed the American square. And it's because we value these things. We value liberty and we value equality, but we value them in very different ways. Here in America, most of our issues tend to go along two lines here. So I'll try to illustrate this as best as I can without you guys being here in front of me. But here in America, we have economic issues. You can think about these as tax policies, business issues, how to regulate banks and Wall Street and things like that. And then we have social issues down here. You can think about these as such as same-sex marriage, abortion. Just trying to think of a few others. Not really coming to mind now. But economic and social issues are the two main things that we break our political issues down into America. It's either an economic issue or it's a social issue. And they operate in very different ways. So you can see that we value liberty and we value equality, but we value them in different ways. So let's go ahead and start here with the top left, the liberals. And note I use a capital L here to denote that it's a liberal belonging more to the left of American ideology, or more to the Democratic or maybe even the Green Party.
So liberals here, when it comes to economic issues, liberals tend to like equality. So liberals support more taxes, more tax regulation, more regulation of banks, more regulations of businesses. You can think of maybe the carbon cap that the media maybe talked about for quite a long time. You can think about how the liberals tend to decide with banking regulations and things like that. They tend to like more regulation on economic issues. They like a fairer chance in the economic game. But then when it comes to social issues, liberals tend to value liberty. So when it comes to same-sex marriage or when it comes to abortion, they want the government out of their lives when it comes to that. They don't want the government to tell them they can't seek an abortion or that they can't seek a same-sex marriage because they want liberty from the government telling them to do so. They want the government to step in on economic issues, but they don't want the government to step in on social issues. So that's generally how the liberals align. And then the other one that we're most familiar with is the conservatives. The conservatives are on the opposite end of the liberals, and so when it comes to social issues, they prefer equality. Conservatives want equality on social issues, so they want everyone to be the same in the fact that no one can seek an abortion. So therefore, it promotes equality in terms of reproduction rights. And then they also don't want same-sex marriage. They tend to fight against same-sex marriage. And as such, they prefer everyone equal. Everyone is equal when it's only a man and a woman, and so therefore makes it equal in terms of same-sex, in terms of marriage in general. So, however, when it comes to economic issues, they don't want the government to step in at all. They value liberty on economic issues. So when it comes to banking regulations or when it comes to tax policies, they want the government out. They want the government not to tell them how to regulate their business or how to run their own business, and they also don't want the government to collect their taxes either. So conservatives tend to be in favor of lower taxes and fewer regulations in terms of economic issues. So this is why it's very tough. That's why it's very, very tough for conservatives and liberals to agree on anything or to really just have a conversation with one another in general now. Is because when you look at these political values, these are things that we really value. We value equality, we value liberty, but we value them in different types of ways. So in order for a liberal and a conservative to talk to one another, they have to sacrifice, or to agree with one another, I guess we should say, they have to sacrifice two of their political values. It's very hard to let go of one political value, let alone two. It's very hard to compromise your political values because that's something that you hold very dear. So when we ask why liberals and conservatives can't really talk nowadays, it's because of how deeply rooted our political values are, whether that be equality on economic issues or equality on social issues, whatever that may be. It's very hard to sacrifice those and to get those to compromise. They'd have to meet somewhere around here, which would kind of be more the moderate sector. Let's go ahead and talk about libertarians and populists, though. Libertarians and populists still have a very special place within American ideology and American politics in general. So the libertarians, they just want freedom from everything. They don't want any government control at all. And there's actually a huge libertarian movement going on within America right now. It's very interesting to observe, being a political scientist, is the fact that the libertarian movement has kind of really taken off in recent years. And libertarians value liberty on economic issues. So please don't tell me how to run my government or how to run my business or how to regulate my business. They tend to support lower taxes as well, but they also like liberty on social issues. So don't have the government regulate abortions. Don't have them regulate marriage at all. Complete absence of government is what a libertarian would support, and they tend to have very negative views on government as well. So libertarians value liberty on all fronts, just complete freedom from government. On the opposite end of libertarians are populists, and populists are very unique. There's very few of them around nowadays, even though they, particularly here in the South and in the Midwest, populists used to be the main political ideology, and it's because of the agricultural sector, and I'll try to explain that here in just a little bit. So in the South, you had this huge agricultural sector, and the agricultural sector really likes subsidies, government subsidies, and they like government supporting their crops and things like that. So when it came to economic issues, they actually liked the government stepping in. They liked the government promoting equality for farmers and those involved in agriculture.
However, they also tended to be very moralistic, very church-going population generally, and so they liked equality. They tend to value the old traditional morals. So they liked equality. They didn't really support abortion. They definitely didn't support same-sex marriage. However, they did like the government regulating their economy and helping them out with subsidies for their crops and things like that. So populists are just ones that really like government intervention on everything. Not to say that they like the government or what it's doing, but they do like the government to help them out with their subsidies, but they also like the government to ensure that their morals are enforced through law as well. So populists and libertarians would not agree with one another. Populist is kind of a dying ideology here in America. Generally nowadays we tend to side with either the liberals or the conservatives, either way. So these are the basic 4 political ideologies. We're going to go into just a little bit more detail. If that didn't quite make sense, hopefully these next few slides will. If they still don't make sense, please let me know. I'll try to explain them as best as I can. So, all right. So let's go back to the bottom right square, conservatives. Conservatives prefer limited government intervention on economic issues and more government intervention on social issues. So they distrust the government ability to do. They have a distrust of the government's ability to do things within the economic domain. So they want lower taxes and less regulation of the economic sector. They do want the government involvement on social issues, though. So when it comes to same-sex marriage, abortion, things like that, they want government to step in and enforce laws regarding those sorts of things. So they generally want to outlaw abortion. They tend to be more pro-life. And then also, I guess I have an example here, include prayer in public schools. Conservatives generally do favor that as well. So they want government intervention on social issues, but no government intervention on economic issues. On the flip side of that, you have the liberals. Liberals prefer government involvement on economic issues and want less government intervention on social issues. They tend to favor higher levels of taxes, and they like more programs, more social welfare programs, or even building roads and things like that. They want government removed from social regulations, so they don't want the government to place laws on abortion, gay marriage, etc. No laws on those types of things, but please place laws that regulate our economy. Populist, the lower two of the political ideologies, I guess I should say. Populist, they want government intervention on both economic and social issues. So they tend to act like liberals on economic issues because they want that regulation of the market, but they act like conservatives on social affairs. So they want to outlaw abortion. They want to prevent same-sex marriage. The populists are also, you tend to be a big fan of gun control, school prayer, as well as higher taxes. So it tends to be a little tricky. Both conservatives and liberals do seek populist support in order to have kind of a productive conversation, I guess, in terms of political ideology. Generally, populists can side with both the liberals and the conservatives because of their unique position within the American political ideology. Libertarians want no government intervention at all on both. Want no government intervention on both economic and social domains. So they act like conservatives on economic issues and liberals on social issues. No regulation of the free market or laws regarding abortion. So it's very interesting that even though liberals and conservatives don't generally talk to each other or agree on anything for that matter, liberals can talk to libertarians and liberals can also talk to populists in the same way that conservatives can relate to libertarians on certain issues and conservatives can relate to populists on certain issues. So the libertarian, and the populist are kind of the go-between for liberals and conservatives. All right. I just kind of want you guys to study this American political square just a little bit, become a little bit more familiar with it, political ideologies. The extra credit for this week is actually a quiz in which you just answer a few questions about your political beliefs, and then it'll kind of tell you which ideology you're in. So if you're unsure about what ideology you may belong to, this is definitely an opportunity to explore that and get some extra credit along the way. If you're already sure, go ahead and take the quiz anyways. Maybe it'll just reinforce your beliefs one way or another. I will go ahead make a disclaimer here, is that we're going to discuss these sorts of things in class, and whether you're liberal, conservative, libertarian, or populist, whatever you may be, I don't really care. I don't really care what your ideology is or what your opinion is. I just care that you have one and that you're able to express that and articulate that. Just don't be on the far extreme ends here with Stalin and Hitler. I don't want you to go to that extreme, but please do have an opinion. Please express your opinion in the discussion boards, and hopefully we can all be civil and maybe have a very productive discussion of politics and ideology in general. So I'll go ahead and wrap up week 1 here. Go ahead and do your discussion board. The discussion board questions are placed on Angel already, so be sure to go ahead and do those. I will see you guys next week. If there's any questions about the course in general, also please let me know.